Welcome back. We're talking with David Valdeo, Kristin Olsen, and Linda Halderman about state politics generally and this year's state budget in particular. Perhaps the biggest change Governor Brown is proposing, some would say it's historic, is his plan to restructure the state-local relationship by shifting funding and responsibility for certain services to local governments. So what services is he talking about?
Well, there are a number of services involved with the realignment proposal, and in concept, I like the idea of cutting the strings in Sacramento and moving those services locally where they're closer to the people. Local governments can usually run programs more cost effectively and efficiently.
And the polling shows that.
The polling absolutely shows that. The concern is that the funding needs to go along with the programs, and then the flexibility needs to be given. Right now, it seems that there's just going to be another flood of mandates given to local government and no long-term plan for funding those mandates, and that puts local governments in a very precarious position.
Right. There is an idea, though, that if the tax increase was passed, that money for 5 years would go toward this realignment. The question is, what happens after 5 years, right?
Exactly. For the first 5 years, the funding is theoretically guaranteed if the tax extensions pass, which I think is a very big assumption. But after the 5 years, there's no plan for funding those programs, and that's a huge concern, especially for cities and counties who have already cut millions of dollars out of their budgets.
I want to get your impressions on this, Dave. Do you think it's a good idea, this realignment?
No, I actually spent the morning at my local county jail touring it and talking to my sheriff about how it's going to affect him, and there's just no room. They're releasing criminals with 30 days of their sentences served, and they've got no room, they've got no way to handle basically what the governor wants to send their direction just in their department alone, and then to worry about being funded later on once the tax increases are gone. It doesn't actually solve any of the long-term problems, and that's what we're here for.
Now, this, though, is $5.9 billion supposed savings to the state if we do this realignment. Again, just like redevelopment agencies, if you say, no, we can't change redevelopment agencies, that's $1.7 billion. No, we can't change restructuring of state government, $5.9 billion. That money's got to come someplace else. And the question then becomes, where does that money come from?
Well, we've been rushed to this process. We were basically given 60 days. We were no time to look at it and actually research and make sure that we can actually solve these problems. And it was thrown out to us. We went through committee hearings. And
all right, let me ask you this. Are you philosophically opposed to realignment, or practically, once you see it on the ground, opposed to realignment?
Just knowing what's going on and how it's being thrown at the locals, no, I'm not a fan of the way it's being done. Philosophically, yeah, I'll support it as long as the locals get to make the decisions on how it's run, but when you've got the mandates in place, the way that they've got to take care of whatever issue it is, I mean, Title 24, the way they take care of their inmates, they can't find any good cost savings as long as we've got the state mandates, and then we've got to rely on the tax increase for the next 5 years to pay for it. It's not a good long-term solution. We've got to find places to save money, and there are areas out there that we can. We're just not given those opportunities.
Linda, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm very concerned that we have yet to see a detailed proposal of what is exactly meant by realignment. So without the details, I feel like I'm being asked to evaluate a skeleton, and to me, promises made to the Valley are often promises not kept. My concern is that the savings will come at the cost of the locals.
So you also, I assume, have a concern about this, even if the tax increase was extended for 5 years, the funding after that, is there a concern that that funding would continue if the realignment did occur?
There is, at this point, no way to know that. And to take that kind of risk and put it on the backs of cities and counties that are already struggling, I don't think is the right approach in this economy.
Well, let's talk philosophically about realignment. Assuming, perfect world, the money's there. Local control, I would assume, is something you support?
It is something I support. And one of the reasons is that nobody knows better what we need in our valley than those of us who live here. It shouldn't be a Sacramento decision. Our schools should be able to decide on their own what our kids need to do and how we spend our money.
In terms of requirements, is there a concern there that maybe the state will transfer these responsibilities to the locals and then may or may not provide the money and then may or may not make additional requirements on the locals? Is that the concern?
Having seen a number of pieces of legislation already so far introduced in the legislature, that is guaranteed to happen. Unfunded mandates appear to be a favorite pastime in Sacramento.
Is that also a concern that you share?
Yes, and there's no reason, philosophically, I mean, if you've got a school board, you've got parents walking in and talking to the school board and actually part of the process. not enough people go up to Sacramento and talk to us about what's going on in their communities. It's a lot closer to them. It's where they can actually have a voice and they can be seen, and the people that live there are making those decisions on a day-to-day basis.
You know, I'm just curious, the California State Association of Counties seems to support realignment. Does that factor into your decision at all?
CSAC is much where I am on this one, is that, as you've said, philosophically in concept, it can make a lot of sense, but the devils are in the details. And so one of the things I've said to Governor Brown as he's visited our caucus is we think it's great that we want to realign programs to local communities where, as we've all said, they know how to better deliver the services to the demographics of their regions. The challenge is the $5.9 billion, I believe you suggested, that they document as savings. Well, that really isn't documented, because the only way we're going to save money is if at the same time we eliminate the state bureaucracies that used to operate the program. And so far there's been intention conversation from the governor that that's his hope to do that, but there's been no real clear plan for doing that. And unless that's done, there's no savings at the end of the day.
Okay, well, when we come back, we'll talk about the dreaded T word, taxes. Will taxes have to be part of any state budget fix? That conversation when we return. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking about what to do about the state's chronic budget deficits. Currently, the state is facing a $25 billion budget gap. While politically unpalatable, many nonpartisan observers maintain that revenues, some type of tax increase, must be part of a solution to fill such a staggering budget gap. To help fill about half of the current $25 billion budget gap, Governor Brown has proposed a special election to vote on whether there should be a temporary 5-year extension of the tax increases passed in 2009, set to expire this summer. The problem, of course, is that most legislators would rather do anything other than propose something that could be viewed as a tax increase. Indeed, virtually every Republican legislator has signed a no-tax pledge before running for office. Grover Norquist, president of the Americans for Tax Reform, has told GOP lawmakers that even a vote to place the question before the voters will be as deadly to their political careers as actually voting for a tax increase. Governor Brown, on the other hand, has repeatedly said that blocking a ballot measure on taxes is undemocratic. He has stated that, quote, "What I'm asking is not for a vote on cuts or taxes, but to let the people decide what is it they want." Well, the question is, why not allow the public to vote on the issue?
The public already has voted on this issue numerous times. One of the things that I looked at is representing the Central Valley and seeing how they do vote on these budget issues, including taxes. And overwhelmingly, people in my district said, this is not what we want. And a special election does not come without a very high cost. I think we can do a lot better. And in a down economy, I don't understand why an increased sales tax that would affect the people who are least able to afford it, I don't understand why that's what's being proposed. We're already near the top in the nation in taxation. That's not the problem.
Well, I think it depends on what data you look at. Some say we're 12th, some say we're in the middle of the pack. It depends on what numbers I think you look at. And that's often very confusing, frankly, to a layperson to try to understand where we are on taxes. There are different taxes that have different impacts. But let me ask the rest of the panel here. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, you're getting a lot of pushback from a lot of the editorial boards of newspapers saying, let the voters decide. What is your thought on that?
Well, if you're going to let the voters decide, you've got to give them more choices. Right now, it's just basically an up or down, and we've taken time to go through the committees and look for those cuts. We've been shot down because it protects a special interest there in Sacramento. But there's opportunities. We should be looking at those before we go back to the people. We're elected to represent them and to do our job, and that's what we're trying to do. Spend the time, make sure we go through the numbers and look for the opportunities, save some money, and not go back to the people for more money. And if we're going to put any options on the table, why not put some more options? Why not give them the option for pension reform? Why not give them the option for regulatory reform? Why not give them the option for something that actually helps create that tax base, puts people to work, which is what people want? And I don't know if they want us taking more money out of their checks, especially when you look at...
Okay, I do want to get to that. I think it's a good follow-up. But I do want to ask, Kristin, what do you think about this issue about not putting on the ballot? You know, the PPIC did a poll, and they found that about 42% want a mix to deal with this problem, mix of tax cuts and tax increases. Only about a third wanted just cuts. You know, a lot of people seem to be supporting in California, not necessarily the ballot, in California, maybe putting this on the ballot. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the fact that the media is often leaving out today is the voters did make a decision. 2 years ago, these very same tax proposals were on the ballot, and 65% of Californians turned them down. And the tax extension proposals that the governor has now introduced are exactly the same as they were 2 years ago, but his don't even include any reforms along with them. The PPIC poll that you're quoting also, when they looked at the very specific 3 taxes, it showed that the support for them was less than 30%. So it obviously depends on how you ask the question, but I think it's so important that if we continue to just tax, cut, and spend in California over and over and over again, we're really not addressing the root of our economic problem. We have to start talking about long-term structural reforms that will help us bring us out of this economic crisis for the long term. And to let the voters decide on something they already decided on 2 years ago is a waste of both time and
We've
money.
only got about 30 seconds left, but David, I want to come back to you and talk about some of the issues that you said were important to deal with other than putting a tax increase on the ballot. What kinds of issues do you think are important that we should be dealing with?
Well, we've got an administration right now that's actually holding up investment in California. We've got industry in my community, the southern part of my district, that wants to invest in California, and we've got a person there that just will hold it up. Oil industry. Oil prices right now are really affecting people at the pump. I mean, $4, $4.30 for diesel. People can't afford these type of fuel costs, and they're trying to find another way to blame. But when you've got almost $1 billion worth of investments waiting in line in the permitting process because of the person that was placed in the administration's holding it up, that's not an actual solution. We need to put those people to work, let the people invest, and help lower our cost to our consumers and our voters.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, if a special election doesn't happen, or if it does happen and the tax increases are not approved, where will the $12 billion in cuts necessary to balance the budget come from? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report.